Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Shortly to be afternoon. We're starting out from my boat today, and we're going to walk north. Now, I promised you last time a video about Wolverton and Cosgrove, and we are going to look at photographs of Wolverton and Cosgrove. But there's a slightly surprising thing, which is that it turns out that there are virtually no photographs of the canal going through Wolverton town proper, only of Old Wolverton, which is the village that was there before the railway town was built. And I suppose the reason for that might be that by the time that photography was a thing, the railway age was fully upon us. And so there are loads and loads of photographs of the railways going through Wolverton, but none of the canal. But nonetheless, let's not be dismayed. We've got plenty of photographs of New Bradwell and plenty of photographs of Old Wolverton and the aqueduct going into Cosgrove and Cosgrove itself. So let's look at those. Now, before we do that, we are going to go and have a look at the map and see where we're going.
Okay, this is quite cool because we are using a really old map now, one that predates even New Bradwell. So let's have a look at the old map. And obviously this is largely nothing, but we start up here at the Asda. That's where my boat is moored. We go all the way down here, past the old Bradwell mill. We're going around through Wolverton. Interestingly, Wolverton station is not in the same place anymore, and the railway line isn't in the same place anymore, although the abandoned old railway line goes down the line of McConnell Drive. And then we're going to go round, and we're going to go up and towards Cosgrove, where we can see the lock. There is the Buckingham Arm Canal there. Not really there anymore, but being restored. And then we're going to finally pop up just as far as this bridge here, which is just before the Priory, which is, of course, now nothing. So, there we go. Let's go and see what it looks like on the ground.
Right, well, we begin our journey on a fairly unremarkable stretch of, if we have a look, frozen canal at New Bradwell. And there are basically no distinguishing features at all on this canal. This is a long straight section, followed by a gentle curve to the right and a bridge. However, the reason why there are plenty of photographs of this section that are worth looking at is that in the 1930s, or 1920s going through to the 1930s, the newly formed Grand Union Canal Company had what you might call a last-ditch attempt to retain the canal's relevance and keep it competitive with the railways and increasingly the roads. And so they indulged in a large programme of upgrades and updates to the canal section, where they dug out huge chunks of canal and redid the banks with concrete and put in new piling, and generally did all sorts of exciting things. So, there are lots and lots of photographs. Oh, you're all right. How's it going? You're all right?
Lovely.
Excellent. So, yeah, there are lots and lots of photographs along this section of the canal being extensively remodelled. So this canal doesn't really look anything like it did when it was dug in 1790-something at this point, but it follows the same track. It's just wider and deeper. As we come round this corner here, we will see the bridge at the new inn. And again, weirdly few photographs of that bridge, but the bridge itself is reasonably original. At least the footings are, the top isn't. And the canal therefore has to narrow as it goes through it, because they widened the canal on both sides, but kept the original bridge footings in place. We'll see that in a second. For those of you who saw the last video, we actually saw this boat, Wolverton, having a little cruise. And that was when we were at Great Linford, I think. But she's tied up here. Of course, when you see the photographs, what you won't see is all these houses down the side. These were built more recently, but under the decking that you can see, which has been put in for homeowners to be able to moor their boats up, I always think it's very unfortunate that none of them choose to do so, apart from the owner of Wolverton. Under there, you can see the 1930s work which was done on the piling on that side. Prior to that, it was just a sort of earth bank that climbed up both sides. However, we've got a lovely, sharp, defined edge to the canal here, and that's all thanks to what was actually the Regent's Canal Company who bought the Grand Junction Canal and turned it into the Grand Union. So here we are. Let us have ourselves a photo stream of the canal works from this area in the 1920s and 30s. Okay, for our next spot, this is the village of Old Wolverton. As I say, we've had to skip over Wolverton itself and go to the little village which gives the town of Wolverton its name, and that is Old Wolverton. As you will be able to see in a minute from the photographs I show you, this area has changed quite significantly, not least because a lot of foliage has grown up over the years. There used to be a clear public footpath up there, no longer. But the pub is still there, albeit it's changed its name and is called the Galleon. And the bridge is still there, albeit it has been knocked down and turned into a sort of concrete 1960s effort. The photographs I have from here vary in age, but some of them are quite old, sort of turn of the 20th century. And they show all sorts of interesting things happening. One of the interesting things is, if we go through this bridge and out on the other side, what you will see is you will see the canal widening out. And there's a reason why it widened out, and that's because a little bit ahead, half a mile ahead, there is an aqueduct. And that aqueduct wasn't always there. When it was first built, there was a big chunk of locks going down to the River Ouse, and then a big chunk of locks going back up from the River Ouse. And essentially what happened is canal technology advanced far enough that they could build an enormous embankment and put an aqueduct in place. And actually what happened was the first aqueduct collapsed after about 2 years, and so they had to reopen the locks again and build a second aqueduct. I'm just going to wander up here past the Welcome to Wolverton board, because one of the photographs we're going to see is a view from here. Now, what is there is the Galleon pub, now called the Galleon, and I think some workshops and a car showroom or something. Anyway, that was all once a timber merchant, timber yard. And if you have a look, we'll just wander down. If you have a look right at the end of the building, you can just see, more or less in the middle of the shot, a white van. And that's more or less where the canal went off to the left and down and plunged down through several locks to cross the Ouse and then come back up again on the other side. That's not what the canal does now. The canal goes along quite a big embankment and up the other side. Sorry, quite a little big embankment, and then crosses over the Ouse at this level over an aqueduct. So I guess what we'd better do is go and have a look at that. Here's the photo stream of North Wolverton. Okay, and here we are approaching the Grand Trunk Aqueduct, and I've done videos about the Grand Trunk Aqueduct before. And broadly speaking, for the history and so on, and for watch me fly a drone around that, you can go back and watch those. But what is interesting about this aqueduct is that after the original stone one collapsed, they used a novel technique, building the trough out of cast iron. And this is a technique, this was used more or less as the prototype for the Pontcessity aqueduct on the Llangollen Canal. That's the one that's been in the news recently because of a breach. So this was used as a prototype, and it's a really interesting structure. It has been restored recently, but it is still more overgrown than it is in the photographs we're going to see. One of the photographs shows it actually empty and being regrouted in the 1920s, which is pretty cool. So it's worth a look, just popping and walking over the aqueduct. I think some of the views are like this. There's a couple of views actually on and one in the aqueduct. I think there's also some views from down below. But I don't propose to go down below because whilst there is a path down there, it goes down there, it gets incredibly muddy down there, and I will get wet feet. So let's go and walk onto the aqueduct and have a look at what it looks like now. Now obviously it's frozen, it's pretty comprehensively frozen, but you can see, if you can sort of adjust for the sun, we've got quite a good view over the edge down to the River Ouse. The original lock line came down there and went across to there. But the aqueduct now crosses straight over, turning around this way. We've got views of the Ouse going off to the east. This, of course, railing wasn't originally here. You were just trusting not to fall into the water. But there we are, the Grand Trunk Aqueduct. Now let's have a photo stream of what it looked like in the early years of the 20th century. Whilst I'm walking back set up for this shot, let me just say hello. I realise I say Grand Trunk Aqueduct an awful lot. For some reason or other, that's what my brain calls it. It is in fact called the Iron Trunk Aqueduct. Never mind. I'll see you guys in Cosgrove. Right, so here we are, the other side of the aqueduct, and we are at our penultimate stop, which is no longer in Milton Keynes or its environs. This is the village of Cosgrove outside Milton Keynes. And this is quite an interesting spot. I've got a few photographs from different angles, but some of it is the same, some of it's changed. Let's go and have a look. To start with, you can see that the lock is not actually pointing straight down the canal. We'll see better when we get up there. And there's also a large winding hole here, and that's going to be relevant when we get up to the top. But there are many photographs of this lock, and what you will see when we get there is that there used to be a swing bridge across the centre of this lock, much like as at Fenny Stratford Lock. And the reason for that is, if you have a look over there, you can see some canal boats going off to the left, and that is the stub of the Buckingham Arm. Now, the Buckingham Arm has long since been abandoned, filled in, and various towns built over it, but there is a somewhat brave number of volunteers that are agitating to restore it, and indeed have restored the first bridge on the canal, so you can now go down there a whole 200 or even 300 yards. Now here is the site of the swing bridge. This large bollard here marks where the swing bridge used to come across, and it used to come across around about to here, and you'll see that in some old photographs. And that was to give access to the Buckingham Arm towpath, which is of course no longer that relevant, although it should be relevant again one day. The original canal cottages are still there, and we were talking about the alignment of the lock. If you have a look at the lock, it is pointing directly at the bank ahead of you, and that's because this lock was originally lock 1 of the flight of, I think it was 5 or 6, that went down that hill through those trees there, in the gap in the trees, down towards the Ouse to avoid there being an aqueduct. It was only ever a temporary solution, but nonetheless, it had to be reopened after the first aqueduct collapsed. So then, this is the Cosgrove lock. Pretty as it is. Let's see some photographs of what it was like more than 100 years ago. Okay, and here we are at our final stop of the day at Solomon's Bridge in the north end of Cosgrove. This bridge, whilst it is not technically in Milton Keynes, basically marks the final point of what you might call the Milton Keynes section of the canal, at which point it then goes out north towards Stoke Bruin. This bridge is a funny old bridge, which is why I've stopped at it. It's called Solomon's Bridge. It links one half of Cosgrove to the other half. It was built by a local landowner. I don't actually know. I imagine he was either a landowner called Solomon, or he was seeking to sort of sit on the coattails of the wisdom of Solomon. In any case, it is an unduly fancy bridge. It's got sort of lots of twiddles and twaddles, and it's also got some niches there and there, which used to contain statues. I imagine those statues have long since basically been stolen and adorn somebody's garden somewhere. One thing about this bridge is it is built out of sandstone, which is a spectacularly rubbish material to build a bridge out of. And you can see it is incredibly weathered. It's more or less falling apart in places. All this was originally faced, and you can see most of the facing has fallen off. The old photographs more or less show it exactly as it is now, but less weathered. So then, that was our trip up through Milton Keynes to find some interesting photographs. I shall show you the old ones now. And there we are. I hope you've enjoyed this little trip through Milton Keynes, and that you like the sort of then and now photograph sessions. I don't know where I'll go next. Please feel free to drop a comment and tell me where you'd like me to go next. Should I go south to Leighton Buzzard and down towards Tring, or should I go north and have a look at Stoke Bruin and Blisworth? I may even pay any attention to what you say. Who knows? In any case, I hope you enjoy these videos. Please do like and subscribe if you do. It helps me out enormously. and I shall see you in the next video. Goodbye.